Okay, we're on a call, a bit of an addition to a podcast we did last week on Physio Matters, but this time it's going to be on the MSK Partners Network's YouTube channel, and we're trying to supply you with up to date information on business as the times are changing almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day, from all different levels, banks, governments. Trying to understand it is difficult, and so there's folk from the MSK Partners Network that are best placed to share that information. So I'm going to try and grease the wheels of conversation with these three gentlemen. The two on my right of my screen, Rupert and Simon, we spoke on the podcast last time. Matt Todman from Six Physio also joining us today. But I thought one of the things that we've got some topics we're going to touch on. First one, then I just want to catch up. If you haven't seen it, the podcast we did on Physio Matters that covers some business rate stuff, and so please visit that podcast. I think it gives you a good baseline of where we're at. But there has been some updates. So if I can just jump in on business rates and where we're up to on that.
Okay, shall I take the lead? Where are we at? So I think everybody understands that we've been, as a profession, kind of excluded from the current moratorium on rates, unlike retail, hospitality and leisure. We all know that now. And what we've done so far with MSKPN is we have, we started canvassing central government. So a guy called Yenrik, I think is the MP for Housing, Communities and something else. He's the Secretary of State who is the decision maker here. So we've written to him on behalf of all of our members. So we're going to tackle central government because I think that's important. Now, the decision has been devolved to local authorities, which again, I think everybody understands. So we would encourage you to sign up, join MSKPN. There's some template letters and advice about the business rates piece on there, and you can access that once you've signed up. It's £1 to sign up as a member, but you can also sign up as a supporter. You'll still get all that information. Fire off letters to your MP, to anybody else you know. We're also talking to the osteopaths, the chiropractors, to ARMA, to a number of other trade associations to see if we can get an even bigger and louder voice. Private GPs, dentists and others are all in the same boat. So again, we're going to try and reach out to them to see what we can do and see if, again, we can get more and more people. Matt's very kindly led the charge on change.org. So there's a petition. Again, the details are on the website. If you look on our Twitter feed, you'll see some details there as well. It's really quick and easy to share with friends and family via social media. We've just tweeted that out, but we've also emailed all our patients. Matt, just remind me of the numbers there.
Yeah, so we've done 3,700 patients. And what's really interesting, when you look at the people at change.org, we've seen a rapid increase of suddenly in the last 20 minutes, gone up by 300 or 400. So patients are really engaging. We've had some lovely, lovely, lovely stories back and lovely messages with their support. And I think that's probably going to be universal up and down the country. I think if we actually get in touch with our patients, I think we forget patient power is so vital and so powerful, and they'll do anything that they want to do to help us, because that's the relationship we have. We have a truly wonderful physical relationship with lots of patients, and they will go above and beyond to make sure they can protect us and protect themselves ultimately as well.
Of course. No, that's really heartening to hear, and there's certainly a smart way of boosting those numbers so that then feeding that forward to our customers essentially and patients to understand the consequences, of course, that would happen if we weren't to act on this sensibly. So no, that's smart, and glad that there's those templates out there. So do sign up if you want to get access to it. What about landlords then, gents? How have you got on with those?
Yeah, I'll start off on that. I was just saying to Rupert before that it has been a very mixed response, and I think that's primarily because we've got landlords at different ends of the scale. We've got large institutional landlords who have huge estates, both office and retail exposure, and we've got much smaller landlords, essentially family offices, who have these properties as investments, and so each of them has very different financial pressures in their own right. So I think the underlying message is, don't just stop the payments and not engage. By all means, get control of your payments, but you need to communicate with your landlords. And a well-structured letter, a well-structured email, talking about the need for them to be part of the solution as a key stakeholder in your business, and not just demanding, but offering some solutions as well. So thinking about what you can do to push out break clauses, to look at extending the term of your lease in return for some rent-free as a potential, or even looking for some of the smaller landlords who need the money coming in, looking at mechanisms like reducing rent to 1/3 for 12 months as an example, or rent-free periods followed by a rent linked to your revenue generation as and when we come out of this crisis. So I think the other thing to understand is that these negotiations will take some time, and I think the situation is going to worsen. So don't be put off by any initial response from your landlord. The fact that you've made a structured response and communicated effectively is the starting point, and it is a negotiation process from there on. So we've certainly got some movement in the right direction, but we've got some way to go. That's for sure.
Of that range of different landlords, as you described it, and their different financial pressures, what's the sort of are there any lines there that have drawn where some are reacting a certain way or some are reacting another, or is it sort of really on an individual level? Because we've had feedback from people that are saying that my landlord just thinks I'm taking advantage of the situation, and then others that are being hugely sympathetic, but it doesn't seem to fall into categories.
Yeah, I mean, our experience is, I guess, the larger institutions have been more forthcoming and getting on the front foot and offering something immediately, and the smaller ones who have obviously tremendous financial pressures themselves have taken a little bit longer to probably get their heads around the situation, and indeed probably do not understand the seriousness of the situation we will find ourselves in. So that's why I think that a few of them probably need a few more weeks to get their head around actually how serious the situation is, to get some more sensible conversations going around these negotiations.
Right. Okay. No, that's really interesting. Now I want to come to you two again on directors' furlough, furthering some of the conversation that we had last time. But one of the things I really wanted to chat to you, Matt, about is there's been a lot said, and rightly so, about how to try and help patients remotely, and that is something that then has led to a plethora of products and services that can be used to try and do that, but also some myths and misconceptions over the ways in which, if done well, there's sort of a suggestion that you can sort of just transpose your existing workload onto remote, as if that means that then you can totally mitigate any of the financial challenges we otherwise find ourselves in terms of clinical capital. So can you just speak to that for a little bit?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think we all try and spin a good story. We all want to kind of make it that actually, we've now gone to virtual and it's very normal and we're going to carry on trading and be normal. As we see at Six Physio, we probably see between 250 and 300 new patients every single month, and that's probably doing okay. I think in the last week, I think we've seen less than 40. So we have this absolute plummet down effect, and that's not because we're advertising, we're doing the right things. It's just people are not sure as to what's going to happen. And just as physios, I think, are slowly having to adapt, but actually we have a very, very different relationship with our patient. And the things which I think the people don't get are the really simple things done well. So it's how you set your camera up, it's your eyesight, it's how you smile. You've got to be on TV all the time. And that relationship is really, really, really hard to conjure up with patients, especially when they're new patients. So regards to the clinical stuff, which is our bread and butter, it's how you envelop a patient into a conversation and make them feel looked after and loved and being part and parcel of it. So I think what's really interesting is that we get all those simple things done right. And also just think of the things done right. It's 250 patients a week we see. So actually all our numbers have gone even further. It's not a month. So even with me, I'm trying to get my head around the numbers of new patients that we see, and when we see them, everything's gone to dust. So we have to stop, we've got to regroup, we've got to make sure we treat everyone so well, we're doing our absolute finest, but it is not the same. And I think to think we're carrying on doing the same stuff, it isn't. Yesterday is gone, today's new.
I think one of the things as well I thought would be worth mentioning, and see if this is your experience too, is that you're more likely to be able to get a new patient come on as a virtual that already has an understanding of you, your brand, and has some experience, maybe as a former patient returning or something like that. I don't know if that's been your experience as well, but I think someone that's completely new to you coming on as a remote consultation as an initial seems to be quite rare.
Yeah. And that's why our numbers are kind of doing what they're kind of doing. But even with the patients that we see, they've got certain expectations. They expect certain things to happen. And the problem is we've got to make sure that we deliver on those. But for new patients, their expectations are very, very different to ours. And I think we forget, we have the curse of knowledge. We know what we should be doing if we get an injury. They don't. And it's how we convey that across the patients to make sure you're really good value for money, because we have to be good value for money. Still, we can't be anything but. Mm-hmm. So it is different.
Absolutely. No, that's useful, and certainly hopefully reassuring for some of our listeners and viewers that might otherwise been thinking that they've seen some of the talk on social media that's sort of glamorising some of the abilities that we have to do remote consultations, but there's certainly no lack of challenge in terms of the actual volume. Certainly, it's better than nothing, but fundamentally it's still a changed landscape. So thanks for speaking to that, Matt. That's really helpful. The sort of directors piece, then, that's been one of the things that's been playing on my mind, and when I managed to finally wrap my head around it, I know that the questions that everyone's business structure is different, especially small businesses are often structured differently, so the responsibilities as well as the abilities of directors to sort of climb themselves out of this varies. So what's the state of play with regards to directors?
Well, Rupert, why don't you have a crack first, and I'll fill in the gaps if I can.
Yeah, sure. I think if you are a director who is also an employee, you've got an employment contract, and you're on PAYE, then you are allowed to be furloughed. And during that time, you are allowed to carry out your statutory duties as a director. But again, as with anybody who's furloughed, you're not allowed to do anything that generates any revenue or provide any service to the business. That's certainly my understanding and the advice that we've had. I think there will unfortunately be lots of directors who don't fit in that category because they're not on PAYE, and that will mean, from my understanding, that they won't be able to be furloughed. Simon, have I got that there or thereabouts?
Yep, no, I agree with that. That view of the interpretation of the information, that's exactly how we see it, yeah.
And if they say that was a small business in which it's, say, a limited company in which the sole director is it's a one-man band essentially, they've got a clinic above a hairdresser's off the side of a gym, and they are the sole director, could they furlough themselves and therefore they'd need to make the business just dormant? They certainly couldn't be offering remote services and the like.
Yeah, that would be, they can't operate. If that was the case, a one-man band who's a director and is on PAYE, they could furlough themselves and get some government support, but they could not then offer remote consultations.
All right. And if they were then a sole trader, they fall under the self-employment style.
Yes,
they would.
That's been referenced by the government.
Okay. So again, if their profits are under 50,000 and meet the criteria that's specified by the government currently, then they might be due for some support. But that, at the moment, the timescales are towards the end of June, which is still some way off. Okay.
No, that makes sense. Are there any other oohs and ahs around directors that we haven't touched there?
There was an update yesterday that we looked at, which basically talked about a change to fiduciary duties of a director, because I think on paper people might be very, very concerned that their businesses are technically insolvent and they continue to pay staff via furlough. The government have made a change on this, and so it'd be worthwhile checking the update on Companies House. But the information very much states that you can continue to pay your staff, and that there has been a change to support directors in making these decisions, which is good.
Sure. No, that's sensible. There's definitely been a few things that have been patched in after the fact, haven't they? So the government's made a statement and then they've had to fill in some of the gaps. But it has come along the days following each of those announcements. So that's been useful. With furlough, this word that we're now using every 5 minutes that we never used before, right? Are there any other? Because there's lots of. I think we did touch on this, but I want to reiterate it where possible as to who can, who can't, what you can and can't do. I wondered if you could talk into being like part-time work, especially. I imagine you guys have got people that work for you guys part-time privately, but have another role, potentially even another role that is continuing to go. So they might be looking for furlough for part or but not all of their working life. So where do folks sit with that?
Again, I'll have a go at answering some of this. So yeah, we've got some employees that work for us 3 to 4 days a week, but they have another job. They're paid employment in this case with university, and so we have been able to furlough them for their 3 to 4 day role with us, but they are able to continue their other paid employment role with the university. So that's an example in practice of how that would work, and that's absolutely fine. The other things we've had to tackle, or questions, staff members who have been furloughed and then have asked, can I take on part-time work while I'm furloughed? Unfortunately, the answer is no, you cannot. If you want to take on any paid role while you're being furloughed, part-time or full-time, the company would need to take them out of furlough, and then obviously we would agree with them that they could take a period of unpaid leave from the business to take up that opportunity. And the other questions that were fielded are around, can I do voluntary work? Can I put my hand up to support the NHS is a common one that we're getting at the moment. And voluntary work is allowed under furlough. So again, we have a number of employees who are exploring voluntary opportunities at the moment, and with our full support to do that.
Yeah, I suppose there's something I can add to that as well with regards to what I've understood from my colleagues at NHS England and Improvement. And as for whether or not this is official yet, but I'm fairly comfortable to be saying this a few days after they've told me it, which is that you can then also, if you were to be that sort of clinician that's volunteering within the NHS, typically if you were to volunteer into the NHS, you wouldn't then be volunteering as a clinician and therefore would not be insured as a clinician for your professional opinions in that. Whereas under the current circumstances, if you were to volunteer for the NHS, be paid on furlough by, say, Pure or Six, then you are going to be then covered on your they're going to insure you, and you're going to be able to volunteer as a clinician. So if your salary was going to be higher on furlough than it would have been at mid-range band 5, which was what they're bringing in returners at, then you may you stay on furlough, be paid through that government scheme, volunteer, but be volunteering as a physio and potentially deployed as a clinician rather than just as a porter or a man in a front desk because you're just a volunteer, which is what would normally be the case. So that's been a smart move, I think, from the government to try and streamline that. As I say, I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case. If not already, then that's definitely in the pipeline. Anything else to add on that then, Rupert?
No, I don't think so. No,
furlough stuff?
Yeah. And the only other thing, I guess, I touched on this in a short video I did yesterday, was just the management of annual leave on furlough. Government advice has been updated, and so you've really got two options now. Staff can use annual leave while being furloughed, but effectively the company needs to take them out of furlough, and then the company needs to pay them for that annual leave at their salary. Now, this is a cost to the business, so at the moment where cost management is critical, it's probably not the preferred option for most businesses. So the next position to look at is, because staff accrue annual leave while being furloughed, is to have proactive conversations with your employees about how much annual leave your business can allow for the remainder of this year, depending on when we come out of this crisis, and the balance of annual leave that hasn't been used, talking about how you sensibly spread that over the next 2 years, given that the government has flexed its rules short term to allow businesses to carry employee annual leave into the years 2021, 2022. So those appear to be the two distinct options you've got. Personally at Pure, we've taken the latter option. It's in this times of cost management, it's the one that works for us. But again, it's individual circumstances will dictate what works best for you.
If I've just thought of a potential sub question that I've been asked a lot on furlough is, say that there's a worker like you've described before that is part-time with you guys, part-time elsewhere, but they are being furloughed from you. Could they take up paid work within the space of where they would normally do the other work? Say they qualify for furlough on one role, not for the other. They then just were to take on part-time paid work, but it would be seen within the hours that they would otherwise not work for you anyway, so they can retain furlough, wouldn't breach furlough within that time frame. Is that the sort of thing that could be done?
They would be in breach of their employment contract with the employer, because effectively the whole furlough process, let's just say, for example, the hypothetical situation is 4 days working for us and 1 day working for a university. The whole idea of furlough is that 4-day employment post is protected, and it is supported and paid for by the government. So for someone to want to take additional paid work during that time, they would need to have a conversation with their employer. And the way that I would interpret it would mean that they would need to come off furlough to take up that opportunity, is the way I would see it.
Right, okay. Just because it's an interesting thing where if someone wanted to take up paid work, I know it sounds a bit silly, but it might as well do it out of industry. But if someone wanted to take up a job with Deliveroo on a Saturday, which isn't a working day for them, that would still breach furlough.
In that situation, no, I don't, because the core working hours as part of their contract with you were, let's just say, Monday to Thursday. Friday, they're working somewhere else. So Saturday is, I think, out of courtesy, they should probably notify their employer that they're taking up another paid role, but that it is not in breach of any of their current employment rights, or indeed their employment position, would again be the way I interpret it.
So their typical hours does matter then, you reckon?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting. I mean, like, there's lots of different variants of that, because there's lots of physios and other MSK professionals that work on like a portfolio basis. You've mentioned there as well, university and your role, but also they might also work for a sports club at the weekend and all sorts of different things that we're noticing. Amazing amount of physios that also happen to work at Moonlight as barmen, I'm finding as well, that I've got loads of questions about that, which is amusing. Matt, I wanted to ask you a question with regards to, there's lots of physios that are also on smaller enterprises that are having to wear many different hats, and I wonder if you had any sort of thoughts as to, because they're scrambling to try to work out whether to try and lean into their clinical stuff, even potentially answer the call for the crisis and lean into their clinical work, or should they double down on trying to understand and comprehend some of the business variables we've been talking about. There's just lots of people with the burden of self-employed guilt going round, and I was wondering if you had any sort of thoughts or even just pep talk for them.
Yeah, isn't it tricky? Isn't it tricky? And it's the speed of change. 3 weeks ago, this is kind of a thought, and now we're fully involved in it. And so I think we have to kind of revolve back to, or at least go back to those really kind of core basic things. And I think your business is probably your most important thing. That's the thing you've spent all your time, your emotional energy, and I think you probably need to be looking at those really kind of simple things. Your what's going out, stopping all those things, and try and maximise what's coming in. I think if you can then at least put some forecasting around it, so you've got a greater view down the road what you'll have, I think then that's probably at least one big thing off your plate. Now, when you've done that, you will have time to do other things. I think volunteering, getting back into the NHS, doing something and helping is fantastic. And we're certainly looking at SIX about trying to get more people to do that. Because I think we have to give back, because I believe there's some karma relationship where whatever you give, you'll get back later. But I think, prop up what you've got, make sure you talk to people. And that's why things like this are so good. Talk to someone else will have an idea or a different way of looking at it. And that's got to be your number one priority. But it is tough, and you should all be feeling deeply uncomfortable at the moment. And if you're not, you're probably not doing it quite right. But it's okay, because I think being uncomfortable is the norm. It's what it is. But you've worked really hard for your business. You've worked really hard for yourself. It's all those hours you've spent where your mates been going out and you've been looking after your own stuff. Make sure you can nail that down. You have a really good foresight and sight from above as to what's going to occur.
No, thank you. That's really helpful. Anything else that you gents want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, could I just reference something in the landlord piece? I know we've talked about it a couple of times. There are going to be a bunch of landlords who want to defer the rent, and we've had that. And I've obviously appreciated that support they're giving us, because it's a cash flow piece for us. They're actually acknowledging that they don't need me to pay the rent for the next few months. But I think you need to be clear when landlords say that to you, that deferring it when you have no revenue to pay for it is just kicking the can down the road. And the danger for all of us is we come out, unless we restructure those deals, and unless all of the stakeholders in your businesses, and when we talk about that, we mean our suppliers, our landlords, everybody we pay bills to, our staff, they're all stakeholders. And we're going to all need to work together to come up with some very different solutions. The old conversations and the old kind of relationship and the way it used to work with landlords and tenants has got to shift now. We can't keep doing things the same way, and deferring it's no good to me. Or I will come out the other end, and if I'm still standing, I'll have this wall of liabilities, and that's the bit you need to try and avoid. And I think, as Simon said, it's going to be a difficult process. Every landlord will have their own pressures, but please don't kick the can down the road. It might relieve the pressure for now. You might say, thank goodness for that, I haven't had to pay it. But you can't have that liability to anybody. And that's every stakeholder. That's suppliers. That's your rates with local government. That's your landlord. And that's your people too. And I think one other little thing I would say is common against, as a truism for them all, is when you go and have those conversations with whoever they are, whether that be the bank, whether that be your people, whether that be landlords, talk to them about all the things you've done, because I think they want to hear that you've taken lots of different actions before you come and talk to them, and that you've pressed every button, you've pulled every lever, you've made all the right decisions to manage your business in these very, very unprecedented times. And if they do, they're far more likely to be confident about your ability to get out the other end, and therefore far more likely to want to support you in any which way they can.
No, that's really helpful. And I think the point that applying or asking for a rent holiday, but then also offering to tag that on to the end of your contract seems like a reasonable sort of back and forth there. Do you see any limitations to that? Do you think that landlords are going to consider that to be not a fair offering?
No, I think there's a bit about they'll get it at some point, and they're going to have to take a commercial view of how viable you're likely to be moving forwards. And if you can demonstrate that to them, then they're going to be more confident about potentially giving them either some more term certain at the end by maybe extending the lease, removing a break, or by pushing out that rent-free period to hopefully the point at which you don't need it, but get it when you do need it, which is right now. So I think, as Simon said, there'll be a whole flavour of stuff. I think Pareto was a smart guy. He came up with an 80-20 rule, didn't he? And 80% of them will play ball, and 20% will probably be a bit crappy down one end. And I've certainly had one or two push pretty hard. To some degree, given the unprecedented nature of this situation, it's been quite easy to push back to say, well, I don't know who else is going to come and take the lease. I don't know who else is going to step into my shoes right now. We just can't be having this argument. We've got to find a solution. We've got to work together. Because I do think it's really true to say we will either all sink together or swim together. Yeah. There can be no winners or losers. We either all lose or we all win at the end of the day.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you all then, I think it might help tie us around really, is what I think I'm noticing is people are quite cautious to provide evidence for what they're describing unless it's forthcoming in all directions. But actually, because it's all talk, and because there will be some people that are chancing it, some people that are actually sat on some decent pots that probably could do more, that are just leveraging the situation as a means of pleading poverty. There's been challenges to people where their landlord has said, show me some figures that demonstrate what you're describing, and then they're cautious to let their landlord in order to, is the landlord therefore going to put a rent hike or some other opportunity where they look back too far into their, how much access do you give them, that sort of thing. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on when you're approaching these conversations, and do any of your landlords either call bullshit or sort of suggest that something should be done differently, or is there a level of evidence that is or isn't appropriate?
Gosh, I mean, I'll share a personal experience. I have shared some MI with a landlord because they took the sensible view of actually having a look at our accounts from last year. And the conversation was, you look like this is a, well-capitalized business. You had a lot of cash in the bank. And I had to say, well, we've actually opened 3 new units this last year, and we've just moved one, and that's not the situation today. He came back to me and said, well, can I see some of that? And I think we have to be as open and as transparent as we can be. And I think the more open and transparent we all are, the more likely we are to reach a sensible agreement. I don't think we can kind of hide our deck of cards and play poker in this particular situation. So I shared that with him. Hasn't come back to me yet, but hopefully it's painted a more up-to-date picture for him, and he will be able to take more of a view of how far he will be willing to support our business.
Right. No, that's great. Simon, you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I just totally agree with Rupert on that. We've had one landlord that's asked for some more information, and I think, sharing your weekly appointment numbers is a pretty graphic representation of exactly what's happened. It's fallen off a cliff in March, so that's the here and now, because none of us are going to have management accounts ready yet to share that show the impact of this recent crisis, but weekly appointment numbers definitely will. So. If we're saying to the landlords that they are key stakeholders in our businesses and we need their support, part of that is working collaboratively. And as Rupert said, sharing relevant information to substantiate your position is really important. And it is what it is at the end of the day. The numbers should reflect the situation. And that is the evidence that these landlords will need to get their heads around the level of support that is required to ensure that they've got a tenant who's viable and is willing to and able to continue to pay rent on their property when we come out of this.
No, fantastic. Thank you so much. Anything else to add, gents? Otherwise, we'll wrap that up at half an hour.
It's all good, Jack.
We're good. Thanks a lot, and no doubt we'll speak again. Thank you so much for all you're doing for us all. It's really helpful.
Cheers, buddy.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Jack.
All the best. Ta-ra.